What is it like to live in witness protection? Well, that's the life now facing the key witness who helped police convict the Merseyside drug dealer who shot and killed 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel in her own home.
The defendant went to the home of the woman who was brave enough to come to court to give evidence against him.
Thomas Cashman had been having an on-off affair with this woman, and after he'd shot Olivia, he turned up at her house.
The defendant invented a defence designed to humiliate and undermine her. It did not work.
But her courage comes at a huge cost. This woman now faces a lifetime of anonymity and living in the shadows. There are thousands more like her in the UK, but it's a secretive world we know little about. I'm Sally Lockwood, and on this Sky News Daily, we'll hear from Reece, who lived in witness protection.
We had to leave everything in our house behind, apart from clothes. I mean, my mum had no baby pictures of me whatsoever left, had no sentimental stuff, literally lost everything.
But first, let's hear from Sky News crime correspondent Martin Brunt, who covered the Thomas Cashman murder trial and can explain just how important this key witness was.
Vitally important to a prosecution case that really was quite weak. There wasn't a great deal of what you might call traditional direct evidence. There was no eyewitness, nobody who could identify Thomas Cashman as the gunman. Police never found the weapons. There was no real forensic evidence to convince a jury. So the testimony of this woman was vital, and she was a very, very strong woman who admitted that by giving evidence, the whole process had ruined her life. The very fact that Cashman had turned up within minutes of the shooting at her house, had roped her in, she got caught up in it, but she was determined to do the right thing.
I've done Joey, those words that this woman overheard Thomas Cashman saying on the phone was essentially, it became the smoking gun in this case. Is that right, Martin? And explain why this witness had to give evidence anonymously.
The witness overheard Cashman on the phone saying, "I've done Joey." The man he had been chasing and trying to kill that night was a man called Joseph Nee, a fellow Liverpool criminal. Those words, "I've done Joey," were interpreted by the prosecution and displayed in court as a confession to the shooting. The woman gave evidence anonymously because she lives within this tight-knit community. She was giving evidence against one of her own, not just one of her own, but a man with whom she had had an affair. She was terrified of retribution for giving evidence against Thomas Cashman. We understand that she's been moved out of Liverpool. It's not clear whether she is now living in the witness protection scheme. Merseyside police have said only that they are supporting her. We do know that she has been granted lifelong anonymity. So although we know who she is, and of course a lot of people on the estate and within that community know her identity, we are not by law allowed to reveal it. She said during her evidence that this whole episode had ruined her life. And I think it's quite easy to understand how and why it's done that.
Do we know how at risk this woman might be now, having given evidence like this?
I'm sure she's at great risk. Police sources suggest that Thomas Cashman is a much feared gangster, was a much feared gangster in that part of Liverpool. So anybody giving evidence against him would understandably feel vulnerable. And it's been reported that she has been given more death threats than any other protected witness on Merseyside for many years.
The information about what happens to this woman now won't be made public, Martin, but what are her choices likely to be?
She does face a very difficult life if she wants to maintain her anonymity, if she has been given a new name, an identity, and a whole backstory. That's something that she and her family are going to have to learn to keep to. I mean, the problem is for a lot of people who enter the witness protection scheme, they don't really know what to expect and they find life very difficult.
And just outline, if you can, Martin, what we know about how witness protection works in this country, what those people go through. I know a lot of it is very secretive.
Well, by its very nature, it's difficult to find out exactly what happens to people who go into the witness protection scheme. There are very different levels of protection that's offered, and it's always a voluntary thing. It would mean broadly moving away from the area you've been living in with your family, with your close family, a new identity, a new backstory, because one of the difficulties people face is when they make new friends, they have to have a story to explain what they've been doing for the previous years, and they have to learn it and stick to it, because to make a mistake can cause obvious problems. But there are little things like, if you FaceTime relatives from your new location, you have to be careful about removing anything in the background. Birthday times, particularly for kids, are very difficult, because if anybody's trying to find you, all they have to do is monitor a relative who might be posting something, birthday cards. All of those kind of things have to be very, very carefully monitored by you and your protectors.
There have been criticisms of the system in the past as well, Martin. Just explain about how it's changed.
One particular case, the Sterlands, were a couple whose son had committed a murder in Nottingham, another city with a big criminal underworld. Their son had shot the friend of a gangster, and the couple found very quickly afterwards there was gunfire at their house. They had to move out of Nottingham. They moved twice, in fact, but within a year they were tracked down and shot dead in their new home. The criticism at the time, this was in the early 2000s, was that the various police forces involved there, where they lived and where they moved to, had not properly shared intelligence about the vulnerability of this couple. And what it led to was a broadening of the witness protection scheme to a national basis, really. The National Crime Agency, or at least its forerunner, the Serious and Organised Crime Agency, set up a national scheme, at least for England and Wales. There's a separate one in Northern Ireland and Scotland and the Met. But a national scheme was implemented, which meant that overall responsibility for people in the system came under one organisation. So there were better codes of practice, better standards, and so on.
I can remember it quite clearly still to this day. And I just remember coming in my house and walking in the front door, going up the stairs. And when I walked in, there was these two kind of tall men in big suits, and there was all these kind of bags packed, and my mum was kind of there, and they just looked a bit worried in a sense, I guess. I didn't really know what was going on at this point. I just knew that we were leaving.
Now, Reece lived in witness protection for several years, from around the time he started high school. He told us his story.
We went to a hotel, and it did feel at the beginning, I didn't really know what was going on. I was confused. I just was enjoying kind of going to hotels and being somewhere different, I guess, at first. And then obviously it started to not kind of end. I think when it didn't end, you start to click on. And my mum did eventually tell me as well, because obviously a big part of the decisions in witness protection doesn't just affect her, it affects me, it affects all of us as a whole.
Explain to us why your mum got put into witness protection.
She was basically coming home from work one time, and she was just driving home, and she stopped at a set of traffic lights, wrong place, kind of wrong time, and a guy came up and tried to get her car, and she didn't know why. And as that happened, another car pulled up and shot him, and it kind of landed over my mum's kind of bonnet of the car, so my mum became a kind of main witness. My mum was the kind of person, I guess, didn't really want to go into witness protection because she was quite a rough person. She wasn't like the easiest person to scare, I would say. So she didn't want to really back down from it, and she kind of didn't want to leave at first. So she kind of tried to kind of not leave, and then she kind of started getting phone calls from private numbers, giving her threats about stuff that was going to happen to her.
But what was it like for you being in witness protection? Did you feel scared at all?
You know that it can be quite dangerous to be involved in those kind of situations, I guess. When I became aware of it more, I was kind of scared for me, but morely for my mum. You just don't know what's going to happen day to day when you're at school and stuff.
Did you ever have your safety compromised? Was there any suggestion that your identity had been revealed or your location?
I do remember having to move quite a lot at one point, and it was just like hotel for 3 weeks, hotel for 3 weeks, apartment for a month, another house for. Do you get what I mean? It was just all over for a while. They obviously tried their hardest to keep as much as they could from me, but obviously being there 24/7, it was kind of hard to keep a lot from me.
What do you have to change? What do you have to leave behind?
For me, my mum specifically, we obviously chose to stay on level 2, which meant we didn't get a full new identity, we didn't move country, etc. So for us, we had to leave our house behind. We had to leave everything in our house behind, apart from clothes. I mean, my mum had no baby pictures of me whatsoever left, had no sentimental stuff, like literally lost everything. She wasn't allowed to return to her house whatsoever. We weren't allowed to contact any friends or family for, I can't remember how long it was specifically, but I'm sure at the start it was at least a year or two maybe. And we weren't meant to be allowed to go near our old area.
And what was it like making new friends? Did you have to, have a new story about where you'd come from? Did you have to have a new name?
We did have to change our name and witness protection when we were moving around different hotels and apartments at the beginning for a while. And I remember my name being Max because my mum was really bad at remembering, and she used to, when we were in hotels, say both names at different points. But when we actually moved into like a house and kind of settled a bit more, and I got settled into school, I was just using my normal name. I think from what I can remember, it wasn't that we were to make up a story or anything. We just weren't to talk or tell anyone why we'd moved really or what we were involved in, apart from certain people. And I found it really difficult to fit in. I think I became very closed off from a lot of people, and I just became very angry and very bitter and very kind of lashing out a lot.
I was going to ask you that next, actually. What was the impact on you and on your mum having to live like this?
It was difficult because I was just kind of finding out different things as it was happening. So at first, I wasn't fully aware of it, and then next minute, I'm told, right, you're in witness protection, this happened, that happens, your kind of life's in danger. It was difficult. I think as well, I started to notice my anger from about age 11. So I guess I became, without realising it, very like, everybody stay away from me. So yeah, it really impacted me.
Now, we see witness protection play out in crime dramas. How accurate is it?
Depending on what the drama is, it tends to glamorise witness protection to an extent, and that is pretty removed from the truth, I'm afraid. Witness protection scheme is secure, yes. Safe, yes. Glamorous, it is not.
Simon McKay is a barrister who's advised the government on witness protection.
And it's often one of the most challenging aspects of it when people are introduced to it. Their perception is this is quite sexy and exciting, and very often for the first few days it might be, but those factors tend to fade quite quickly, and people get into the routine and mundane routines of life, and that's when it becomes much more challenging for them. Very often individuals think that in some way, shape or form this is going to be an improvement on their existing life. It is never that. Indeed, the police will generally attempt to represent their new life as it was in their old life. So, if the individual's living in a bedsit above a takeaway on a high street, suburban high street, as a general rule, they're going to be moving into a similar environment.
What are the biggest challenges of keeping someone safe in witness protection?
Probably complacency. So they go into the scheme, and because the officers that deal with this are very often experienced and good at what they do, the confidence that the person going into the scheme has in their safety is often a given. So within 2 or 3 weeks, they can become a little bit complacent and assume that everything is okay and that they're no longer going to be at risk. And sometimes they themselves can start to take some unnecessary risks that can place them back in jeopardy. It's an entirely voluntary scheme. So the police cannot compel someone to stay in the scheme if they don't want to stay in the scheme. They can't prevent people from using social media. They can't even prevent people from having contact with their family. And that's another one of the big challenges. That's a very, very difficult situation for someone to find themselves in, particularly someone young. One of the most controversial witness protection cases was the girlfriend of Stephen Cameron. Stephen Cameron was murdered by the kind of underworld criminal figure of Kenny Noy. He murdered Stephen Cameron on a slip road off the M25, and his girlfriend, Daniel Cable, was obviously a key witness in the case. She's still in the scheme.
Another well-known case is the killers of James Bolger, the toddler who was murdered in Merseyside back in the 90s. Robert Thompson and John Venables, they were given new identities after their release back into society, but that's not been without its problems, has it?
Now you see the other side of the coin, of course. So these were the offenders who are released back into the community and have to have new identities as a result. They're not the only ones. Mary Bell is another example, and many other child killers who are subsequently released to have new identities because of the general public outrage surrounding their offending. But it's extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult to manage. And the one thing I haven't mentioned so far is the huge psychological pressure on individuals. I mean, if you think about it in a national security context, informants working against terrorist targets like Al-Qaeda, or even, because it's back in the press again, Northern Irish terrorism, when these individuals are compromised, very often they've been living dual lives anyway. And then the threat arises and they're plucked out of their existence and without any opportunity to, process it or tell people what's going on.
How hard is it to find someone once they've been given a new identity in this way?
The police service are very, very good. The biggest vulnerability is not the organised criminals who might try and seek them out. The biggest vulnerability is always the protected person, who can get complacent, can get careless, is just sick of their life, and just yearns for some contact with their former loved ones, family and friends.
And how much more complicated has social media made things?
Most of us have a digital footprint, and it's very compelling for people to want to be on social media and map out what they're doing with their life. And that's not to say you can't have social media within the confines of witness protection. You can, but the obvious risk of compromise exists when people are taking selfies or they're taking pictures of their family. Organised criminals are pretty sophisticated, and whilst the system is difficult for them to infiltrate and to undermine, what they can do is begin to put the jigsaw together. So where an individual is using social media and there are clues within the posts that they're leaving, this will facilitate very often organised criminals to jigsaw the pieces together, which can often lead a trail to where those individuals are located.
Reflecting on it now, Reece, I mean, you're 26 years old now. It's 10 years on since you left witness protection. How would you say it's impacted your life?
I've been in and out of therapy for the last 6 years, and I would say that I've really started engaging in support when I was 20, and that's when I made the proper kind of changes more. So I've been working at it for 6 years, and I still definitely have a lot of issues, and sometimes I can overreact, and sometimes I can be over the top, sometimes I can lash out, but it's just about understanding that this all comes from trauma and what I've been through, and that you just need to keep working at it, and eventually, as time goes on, it gets less and less, and you get better, and you get better.
Thank you to Martin, Reece and Simon, and to you for listening to the Sky News Daily with me, Sally Lockwood. This episode was produced by Annie Joyce with Alex Eden. Our editor is Paul Stanworth.